Hello, everybody. I'm Gwen Campbell-Mindes, and welcome to Books My Dad, who has a PhD in English literature, thinks I should read because reading them improves my understanding of good literature. Also known as Gwen aimlessly chatters about real literature. However, today, I am going to start, before talking about the book at all, celebrate my 6 subscriber milestone. Whether or not I'll have 25 or 6 subscribers by the time you actually see this video is anybody's guess. But as of this particular moment in time, my particular analytics read that I have 26 subscribers. So I want to thank all those of you who have subscribed for making it seem like people are actually listening to me. And I want to thank Simon, Jesse, Cox, Bermuda, Tim, Chris, Albright, Megan Batchelor, and J.L. Smith, and 11 other people who are unnamed because they do not allow people to actually see who they are when they subscribe. These are the people who have subscribed since my last milestone, which was 10. So thanks to all of you for doing this, for stopping in, for watching at least one of my videos, for thinking that my book picks might possibly be interesting. Whatever your reasons are, I do appreciate it. So that's that. And now let us move on to the book that I'm going to be talking about this particular week. As you can see here, there is a shelf full of various spy and or mystery novels, but the ones in the center are the ones of import, that is, the Complete Sherlock Holmes 1 and 2. Now, I did not read the Complete Sherlock Holmes 1 and 2. What I, in fact, read was simply the first, was simply one of the Sherlock Holmes books in the volume 1 of the Complete Sherlock Holmes. And I'm not showing you the cover of this book because it is a hardcover bound in red and black cloth, which basically means, or canvas or whatever that material is on there, which means that it's not really worth looking at. So the thing is, I hadn't read Sherlock Holmes before. I'm not generally a big mystery reader. I do tend to focus in my reading on fantasy novels, and so Cat Who notwithstanding, which is barely even a mystery series, I hadn't looked up Sherlock Holmes because, well, even though it's one of the gold standards of mystery writing, if you're not interested in mysteries, you don't really care about gold standards of mystery writing. So here's the cover page of the book, which is depressingly more interesting than the actual cover. I did read the preface by Christopher Morley, and he is a longtime fan of Sherlock Holmes and discusses in his brief foreword, it's about 4 pages long, and one of the big things that he talks about in it is more about how he feels that Conan Doyle was a kind and good person and generous, and he admits that there are some issues in the series in terms of continuity, that, you know, a Mrs. Watson appears out of nowhere in later books that nobody quite knows where she came from because she's clearly not the same Mrs. Watson as Watson had been married to before. And he freely admits that there were some issues with Conan Doyle personally because Conan Doyle believed in various supernatural things, which it does strike one as odd given that he is the man who wrote up a character who would have thought that supernatural causes was absolutely ridiculous. But this is not the particular one that I read. What I read was the Memoirs of Sherlock Holmes, which my father As I've said before, as I say in the introduction to every book in this series, this is based on my father's specific recommendations. He very specifically wanted me to read, if I was going to be reading Sherlock Holmes, as he recommended, that I would be reading the Memoirs of Sherlock Holmes. So why memoirs rather than any of his better known complete books? The best known item in memoirs is, as I understand it at least, the last part of the memoirs, the Reichenbach Falls incident, in which ostensibly Holmes is killed. And I think, based on what I had been told, the reason for reading this, as opposed to the others, is that this allows the brilliance of Sherlock Holmes to shine without getting overly caught up in the problems of writing a novel. That is, when you write a novel, there's a lot of connective tissue that has to be put into it. There's a lot of, how did we get here? How did we go there? Why are we here? What is the motivation? Where did everybody go? What did this person do? What was happening? Here's my daily life that was going on around me. There's a lot of these sorts of things that go into novels that you don't have to do in a short story. The great advantage of working in a short story is you can dispense with all of the other stuff of the story, all of the other surrounding factors, and focus in on this one incident that you want to talk about. You don't have to develop a character because you're just talking about this one thing. You don't have to spend huge amounts of time on motivations or plotting or anything else. And so what these are distilled Sherlock Holmes. This is, here is the facts of the case. Here are the things that Holmes discovered. Here's how he discovered, some of his techniques for discovering things. And here's where it all came out in the end. And I would guess, based on what my father claims, because again, I don't read a lot of mysteries. I haven't read anything of Sherlock Holmes but this. So I am forced to rely upon the word of my PhD in English father, that what you're dealing with here is a distillation down to the essence of what makes Sherlock Holmes such a fascinating, such a constantly returned to character. And that is not just that he notices things other people don't, but the fact that he creates a logical train of thought based on those things, leading him to whatever conclusion. And the thing about Sherlock Holmes is it doesn't bear too much hard thinking about, in the same way that the science on Star Trek doesn't bear too much thinking about. Because when you're watching Star Trek, you can hear all of the talk about warp drives and tachyon pulse emissions, but the point of it is not the actual science. The point of it is watching the problem-solving process. It's watching a person sit there and say, how do we work through a problem logically? One of my favorite episodes of Star Trek Next Generation is in an earlier season, in a much maligned episode, in my opinion, in which they're caught in the spatial distortion of the week, and Geordi LaForge creates a holographic version of Dr. Leia Brahms so that he can have somebody to bounce ideas off of. And what makes that episode is watching two people talk out a problem. That's the key to the episode, is that it's not about the fact of the problem. It's not about being caught in the distortion. The episode is about watching two people talk about a problem. It's about watching them work through it. It's about watching two conflicting perspectives, the theoretician who helps design ships and the engineer who's on the ground who has to work with the ship, and the two of them bouncing back and forth and talking through the issues. And the thing is, it's really, really interesting to watch, And the point of it is this interaction. And so the thing about Sherlock Holmes is this isn't so much about assuming that a particular kind of cigar leaves a specific kind of ash that could be so clearly determined just by somebody looking at it. It's watching him be able to say, if that demonstrates this set of facts, how does that set of facts mean of necessity that another set of facts is so? It's that whole, once you have eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. That old saw, taken from, and no doubt paraphrased from Sherlock Holmes in some way or other, not that it appears in the memoirs at all, that's really the key to Sherlock Holmes. And so I think I would have to agree with my father on this one, which is if you're only going to read one, you should read a collection of short stories precisely because you're not going to get caught up in extraneous details. You're not getting caught up in plots and characters and interpersonal drama. You get to focus in on the genius of Sherlock Holmes and what that means. Reichenbach Falls is actually a very distinct exception precisely because it is not about Sherlock Holmes's problem-solving process. Aspects of it show that what he's doing mentally, show where he's at, but it doesn't, in fact, tell that story. What it does is it wraps it up. It creates a conclusion. It adds in a certain amount of pathos in the end of, Watson agreeing, deciding that he's going to publish this last story in defense of his friend and to say the truth of what happened that day. But it very much lacks Holmes, precisely because, of course, this is a wrap-up in the series, one that was reversed later. But the rest of this series is very, very much about looking at facts and following them through to their logical conclusion. And the relationship between Holmes and Watson is almost a non-issue in this. It's taken as read that they are close friends. It's taken as read that Watson thinks extremely highly of Holmes, that he's been along on other adventures, and so on and so forth. But this book this particular collection narrows its focus. And so I think, obviously, if what you're interested in is the Holmes and Watson relationship, you're probably better off reading the novels. But if what you want to narrow down on is what is Sherlock Holmes like? Who is this character? Where did this person that we see on the TV show Sherlock, which I haven't watched because I don't care, but where did this person come from? That's what you get from this narrow focus. And so I recommend it on the basis of a narrow distillation of what it is and what it means to be Sherlock Holmes. And I'm sure there are those who will disagree. Obviously, probably better read in Sherlock Holmes than myself. But that is very much how I see it. And I think I don't have anything else to say on this particular piece of literary or literature-related rambling, so I will wrap this all up. And thanks again, 25 subscribers, and I will see you all next week.